So we are going to begin. Today we have with us Nick Bewick. Nick Bewick is an architect, director of projects in the studio of Michele De Lucci. I explained it to him before what I am going to say in this presentation, so if you don't mind, I am going to speak in Spanish to introduce, and afterwards Nick is going to speak in English, obviously, but I suppose that all of you understand at least a little English. Bien, la presencia de Nick Bewick hoy aquí es una presencia esperada por este curso. Nick Bewick, como os decía, es el jefe de proyectos del estudio de Michele De Lucci en Milán. Michele De Lucci, el titular de ese estudio, es una de las figuras del diseño y de la arquitectura en Italia, con una larga trayectoria, él y su estudio, del que participa con alta responsabilidad Nick Bewick, una larga trayectoria en el tema que ocupa nuestro curso, posgrado en diseño del espacio de trabajo, que es el tema del proyecto de oficina. En el caso de Michele De Lucci, él ha intervenido desde hace muchísimo tiempo en ese tema, y lo ha hecho no solamente como profesional ejecutivo, digamos, sino también desde un punto de vista de indagación, de investigación sobre la temática de la oficina. Un caso, por ejemplo, que a nosotros nos interesó notablemente en este curso y que habéis visto que hemos analizado en este curso, es el de la Citizen Office, ese modelo de oficina con el que estuvo trabajando Vitra y que precisamente puso en manos ese estudio, lo puso en manos de diseñadores, de algunos diseñadores de prestigio, entre ellos Michele De Lucci. Estaba también Ettore Sottsass y algún otro diseñador de prestigio. Como consecuencia de ese estudio sobre la Citizen Office, después se realizó y se implantó la oficina central de Vitra, que diseñó Seville Pitch, que también estuvo con nosotros hace ahora un par de años. Bien, en definitiva, en el estudio de Michele De Lucci, con Nick Bewick a la cabeza de sus proyectos, han desarrollado ampliamente la temática del espacio de trabajo, entre muchas otras. Es un estudio de envergadura, y siempre con este cuidado por atención a los aspectos funcionales, pero también a los aspectos más delicados del diseño. Recientemente ellos han intervenido, y ahí ha sido responsable máximo Nick Bewick, en el Salone del Mobile en Milán, con una propuesta llamada La Passeggiata, en la que de alguna manera han explicado, esto es una cosa que cada vez que se produce el Salone se le encarga a un estudio de prestigio internacional, ellos han explicado su idea de lo que el espacio de trabajo ha de ser, de lo que el espacio de trabajo es hoy, en este momento en que estamos ya bien entrado el siglo XXI y en que las mentalidades y los comportamientos se están decantando claramente hacia eso que llamamos el trabajador del conocimiento, hacia el trabajador con una iniciativa propia, hacia ese trabajador que ya no es un trabajador abnegado y que forme parte de una serie de, digamos, mecánica de cosas, sino que tiene la capacidad de decidir y que por tanto es una persona activa. Los espacios de trabajo deben responder a ello. Hemos visto ya algunas cosas en este curso y sin duda hoy la charla de Nick Bewick nos va a poner en situación mucho más desde esa indagación, desde esa puesta en práctica que en su estudio llevan en el día a día en esta temática. Welcome, Nick Bewick. Thanks.
Okay, I'm going to go and stand over there because it's easier for me to talk, I think. Thank you, Ricardo, for the invitation. I've been very impressed by just this very short visit to the school to see how organized everything is. So I'm sure that you should all be very happy to be here, to be participating in the course. What I wanted to talk about apart is give you some of the background and the history of what we've done over quite a number of years. I've been in Milan almost 30 years, so it's a long time we've been working on this subject of offices. I'm very interested in the project that you will do together. It's a very difficult project, and maybe in going through the presentation, maybe there's some things which might be of interest that could be related to the project which you will undertake. Anyway, to start, where does this all begin for us? I think for Michele and myself, the person that really was behind where all this work has gone on in terms of the office is Adriano Olivetti. Olivetti, I hope you've probably heard of Olivetti as a company. Doesn't really exist anymore, unfortunately, but Adriano Olivetti and previously his father, who started a typewriting company, really were the founders of how much of contemporary design and contemporary thinking really evolved in the country, not just in terms of making products, but also in terms of how work and society could function together. Anyway, in terms of office furniture, although Olivetti is maybe better known for making typewriters or computers, they also had another company called Olivetti Synthesis, and one of the first products that was designed, this system called Spazio from BBB, which were architects based in Milan starting in around the 1950s. This desk system was designed in 1962, I think, and it was the start of the kind of company's involvement in trying to produce industrial products for the workplace. Obviously, Michele didn't work on this project, but he was asked to join the Olivetti team through his relationship with Ettore Sottsass, who at the same time of working as a designer within Olivetti was also had founded the Memphis group, and Michele was his assistant within Olivetti to focus on the design of office furniture. And you might think, well, these are just some tables, etc., kind of, some sketches, but Michele was actually very lucky. He went on a world trip to go around the world to go and understand what was happening with office furniture, to go to America and see what was happening in the US, to go to Japan, etc. And one of the first products that they developed was this system called Icarus, which when you look at it now, you think, well, my God, people used to work with this. But if you look at the size of the computers and the elements and the whole the way that the furniture is designed, things have obviously changed quite a lot. But at the time, particularly in how things like cabling and the issue how to resolve things like this was something very, very important. The great thing about Olivetti was that not only as an industrial organization, but as a patron towards design, they also sponsored the Memphis organization. So this was an installation done in the Triennale, in the design center in Milan, where taking the same industrial components, they created this kind of Memphis-style environment in terms of how to think about different iconography and different ways or different images of how the office could be developed. Moving on from the Icarus project, this is Delphos. Maybe I think if you look at these things, you think, well, this is, it's kind of grey, rather boring kind of furniture. But back in the 1980s, this was the kind of the most advanced thinking in terms of how to group people who were working together in open space, how to kind of think about how you could kind of create forms and desks that would allow people and configurations to be allow kind of multiple uses of the office space. At the same time, Michele was working on products like Delphos. He was also engaged in the design of products. These are kind of laptops from 1994, so it's like it's 20 years ago. But you think that things have changed quite a lot. But this was a very important and very fruitful period of time. I remember when I was working in the studio together with Michele, we actually had part of the Olivetti design team within the same space. So they're all kind of all working together on the development of products together with us. These, again, rather ancient looking things. These were kind of multimedia kiosks where, again, you would, you could actually pick up a phone with a oh, sorry, pick up a phone. Okay, I won't do that. You could pick up a phone with a cable and speak to somebody on the other end. And then later products that were these were advanced jet printers back in the late 90s. Anyway, unfortunately Olivetti doesn't really exist anymore. There are stories that actually Steve Jobs went to approach De Benedetti, who was the head of Olivetti many years ago, to ask for money to actually invest into what he was doing, and they didn't really understand, unfortunately. But that one might have changed the whole nature of how the electronics industry, and particularly the communication industry, might have evolved in Europe and the rest of the world. For me, I think it's important when we go through this kind of process to talk about certain personalities and figureheads that have been involved in the work that we've done. Ricardo mentioned Rolf Fellbaum. Rolf Fellbaum is the chairman of Vitra, and he has been a figure not just for the studio, but for many designers who've worked in the whole kind of office sector. And he's really an incredible person who has so much enthusiasm for design and promoting how design can respond to the workplace. The company Vitra, their success in many ways, and their success still today, is based on the fact that they are licensed manufacturers of furniture produced by Charles Eames, and it's still probably their biggest economic contribution to the organization still today. But Rolf invited Michele and Ettore Sottsass and Andrea Branzi and to work on new ideas in terms of the office. This drawing was actually done by a friend of mine, who unfortunately is no longer living with us, James Irvine, who was a British designer who, when I first went to Milan, James became the assistant to Michele in Olivetti. This project, I don't want to talk too much about it, but this was a sketch of Michele's proposal, which was this kind of idea of how you could create a kind of fold-up office. These tables were like kind of lazy Susan tables, round tables that would spin round, but you could actually take off the table, and the panels could be then folded up, and you could actually hang the whole system on a wall. This is actually part of the installation. And there was another interesting piece was a kind of archive shelving system with integrated kind of wall panel that could slide. So you could use the archive system as a way of dividing the space or closing the space. So this was the contribution that we made in this office, Citizen Office exhibition. And as Ricardo mentioned, Citizen Office is still a theme which Vitra are using today to promote their thinking about how the workplace evolves. Another influential and very important figure for the studio, and particularly for Michele, is Ernesto Gismondi. Gismondi is the chairman or the founder of Artemidi, the lighting company. And I think one probably interesting evening. Gismondi talking to Michele, they talked about designing a new light fitting, and as you probably all know, this product, the Tolomeo, this angle poise light, out came this kind of product, and it's today this was an early prototype, and this is the product today that you all know. It's still the company's most important product, even though it's designed in 1987, in terms of image, but also in terms of actual revenue. This is a product which still produces the most money for the company today. It's something which keeps going, and obviously has been developed into different versions. It's also, when you think about from a professional point of view, if you're able to create a product like this, you can live life in a much easier and much more relaxed way, because to be very kind of blunt, I mean, the royalties from a product like this allows you to run a studio and to develop your career, and you have the opportunity to experiment and to go on with what you're thinking, because you know that some money will arrive every year or every month, etc. Another big breaking point for the studio was a competition that we won. We were at this time in the 1995. The studio was about 10 or 12 people, and we were invited by Vittorio Lampugnani. Vittorio Lampugnani had been the director of Domus, the magazine. He was an Italian architect, but was the advisor for Deutsche Bank for their architectural and design matters. And Deutsche Bank were thinking about how to completely revolutionize their branch network. We were in a period when, okay, the wall was no longer a problem, but East Germany needed to be modernized. And the bank was thinking about how can we create something to kind of go in and implement a system of furniture which would allow the bank to basically demonstrate that it wanted to unify the whole country and to create a kind of a new and fresh identity for the bank. So anyway, we were invited to this competition. We actually beat Norman Foster, which was obviously a great thing. And for us, for 10 people based in Milan, this was a huge leap forward in terms of recognition and in terms of what we were able to do. I think the project was interesting because we tried to kind of go away from this idea that the banking consultants were in a big open space. We created these kind of like freestanding rooms where a consultant could meet with a client. And it was a little bit this idea that the consultant was a kind of craftsman. He had his own space, he could address the space, he could create his own particular response. It had an acoustic ceiling, which also the air conditioning was kind of coming through. And the great thing to work on a project like this was because the bank was so powerful and so dependent on this project, we were allowed to develop almost every single part of the system was specially designed. So this was a big step forward. We went on to develop with suppliers, desking systems. This is not so interesting, but it was for Mauser, who was a very traditional kind of steel bashing German company. We modernized their furniture, which obviously they were supplying to the bank. Another project which was, again, when you look back at it, you think, my God, how did they conceive or even think about these kind of things? But it was based on a workshop between Olivetti and Philips. And the idea was to think about how to create the new tools of the work environment. What was technology going to create in terms of tools that we would use? And this is a sketch, a little bit reference to the kind of shaker idea of you hanging things on the wall that would be the things that you use in your home. This was a similar way of thinking to products that might be used in the workplace. And this well, the kind of sci-fi looking thing, which was obviously very, in some ways over-designed, was one of the kind of the ways that we were looking at developing the kind of products. But if you obviously this is a piece of okay, I can't do this obviously. This is obviously the base of a Ptolemaic light, but just at that time they were also thinking that you could have transparent screens, that the screen that you'd be using would be transparent. These rather Star Wars looking keyboards were, I think, a lot of, well, maybe today you think, well, it's rather kind of ugly, but it was to think about a whole new kind of language that could potentially evolve in the workplace. This was a kind of portable computer, had a kind of like a fabric coat around the actual products, and this was the kind of silver things on top with the antennas. You know? I mean, you do everything now on an iPhone or a Samsung phone, but I mean, this was the possibility of thinking back in the early 90s in terms of technology. Another very influential figure has been Franco Bianchi. Franco Bianchi is Italian, looks very Italian. He was the CEO of Castelli, which was an important Italian furniture manufacturer, famous for the plier chair, this fold-up chair. He instigated the fact that Castelli was sold to Haworth, which is one of the world's leading furniture manufacturers, and through working together with Franco, we worked on a project called Tutti Work Architecture. Now this came out of a research done by DGW, which I'll talk about a little bit later, but they had done a European research into thinking about how office systems might evolve and work, and the big word was what they called off-modularity, which basically meant that most office systems had been designed in a kind of very modular way. You had kind of a desk that was 1 meter 60, 1 meter 80, and that was the way that it all worked with the structure. The idea of off-modular planning was that you had this kind of horizontal beam, so that you could, the way you positioned the desks or the elements was kind of horizontally modular, and you didn't have to always work with this approach. The other thing was interesting was that with a single extrusion, this column, this one going to bite it. this column, you could start to create architecture. So from the desk leg, you started to create this whole kind of range of components, which allowed you to also kind of create spaces. So using very few elements, we were able to develop a huge range of different configurations and different types of spaces. Following this project, and at that time with Michele and I, we formed another studio called Student Partners, which was to follow various architectural projects in Germany. But Franco Bianchi, who had been head of Italy, was asked to go and run the Haworth in North America, and he invited us to come to work in North America to work on a whole new kind of platform of kind of products. And you might think, well, this is again not very exciting, but for an organization that basically was taking rolls of steel and bashing steels and producing cubicles, which is the famous kind of American office furniture solution. This project, which was a whole kind of combination of walls, archive, different desk systems, and also a raised floor, was something that was very, very new and very, very important for the whole organization of the company. This is a company that sells $3 billion, I don't know what that means, $3 billion of furniture a year. So it's a what they produce is very, very important. And in fact, it was a whole different world. We were used to working, in Italy, where, you sit round, have drinks, talk about kind of developing a new product. These guys wanted to know from day one how much that product was going to cost. So everything was focused on that product, that when it came out of the factory in a year's time or in 18 months' time of development, that had to cost that amount of money. So it's a whole different logic in terms of thinking. Again, this is the kind of furniture that kind of came out. This was a pattern system. Nothing particularly mind-blowing, but for the North American market, this was something quite new, and also this idea that they could link together all sorts of different types of products to create one big family. It's called the integrated pallet. Haworth, I mean, Haworth now today has just recently bought Poltrona Frau, Italian company, and Cassina, or they bought 50% of the company. So these people are the big players in this business, and they're probably companies that as you go on in your professional lives, you'll face these types of organizations more and more. In the same way that the furniture fair in Milan, I was talking to Riccardo, I don't know how many people went to or been to Milan for the furniture fair, or just went. It's a big event. Neocon, the fair in Chicago, is the big office furniture event. It's probably the most important event, even bigger, more so than Milan, or even the fair in Cologne, which is called Orgatec. In terms of the big industry of office furniture, this is where people go to present products. Another important company for us has been Unifor. Unifor is, I tried to find a photograph of the guy who runs Unifor. He's called Piero Molteni, and he is a person who doesn't say very much. He basically walks up and down the factory like this every day, thinking how he can make a better product, or how to make a more interesting solution. This project, Progetto 25, designed by Luca Meda, was a very influential, and all architects and main designers wanted to use this kind of product because it was so beautifully designed and so well proportioned. And we, unfortunately this isn't a very clear photograph, but we developed a system called MDL, which is a desk system with Unifor, and I'm busy working on a new product with them at the moment for a project which will be ready next year. The power of a company, again, like Unifor, is that the way that they work in the let's say the North Milanese or Brianza kind of manufacturing situation is that they put the actual equipment that makes special manufacturing processes for veneers or whatever into lots of factories. So they have a kind of a network of companies that they can use, and rather than having one big factory to produce everything. So they have this network, which is a very efficient system of allowing them to be flexible to produce lots of different types of products. Another influential figure has been the studio. This is Corrado Passera. He was a guy who was in Olivetti. Is a typical network of, hope you all know McKinsey. McKinsey is a kind of management consulting organization worldwide, and many of the kind of managers that you face all around the world have gone through the McKinsey school. Corrado Passera was a McKinsey trainee and became a top manager in Olivetti, and he went on to run both initially after Olivetti the Italian Post, but also in Banca Intesa, and he invited the studio to develop a whole new concept in terms of retail banking. This is the retail banking for Banca Intesa. You can obviously see there's a Tolomeo light. But interesting was this idea that somebody who's going to go to the bank counter could actually sit down in front of the person who's behind the counter. So this way of trying to improve the whole kind of service process is something that was very much part of the work that was done and trying to kind of humanize the banking activity. This is a branch in Milan that was treated. And then more recently with Bank Intesa, this is a new tower that was designed by Renzo Piano, and we've done some of the furniture. This is actually produced by Unifor, and the interesting thing here is that there's okay, sorry, I won't do this anymore. These tables, which are, this is a 4-person table, but it also exists in a 6-person, have one leg. So it's all designed to have a central leg, so everything underneath the table is completely free. So this was again, this guy Piero Molteni from Unifor is able to engineer and to produce these kind of products. Oh, this is the bank. This is the post office system that we did for with Passera for the post. And this is the kind of interior of the. So this really kind of revolutionized the idea of the post office service and the image of the post office within Italy. So just quickly to go through some other projects we've done recently. This is a pharmaceutical company, an existing factory. We put in this new block, which was a kind of reception and this major staircase, and around this kind of atrium is an area which displays and talks about the history of the company. And then you go up and there's a kind of conference space, and go out onto a kind of garden. This big glass wall, which looks out towards a main motorway, is a way of kind of publicizing, and that you can see images and things through the glass wall. As you go through the space. Okay. This is an idea of how to transform basically a rather 1960s kind of pharmaceutical factory, that now all the employees, all the visitors all go through this central entrance, so that there's no longer kind of back door. Everybody is experiencing the ideas and philosophy of the kind of company. Just quickly, this is a project which I'm busy running at the moment. This is in the center of Milan. This is for Unicredit, which is one of the major banks in Italy. And we're designing this building. It's called the Pavilion. And I don't know whether you know much of Milan, but this tower is part of a huge new development where it's called Porta Nuova Garibaldi, and the bank actually rent the space in the tower that was designed by Cesar Pelli, the American architects, but they decided that they needed their own space with their own particular identity to have a building where they could use it for institutional events like the board, the shareholders meeting, or particular presentations related to the banking activities, but also have a building where they could have exhibitions. There's also a kindergarten, an asilo, and this is from the outside. So the building for us wants to kind of a little bit play against what's around it. Most of the buildings adjacent to this new building are in steel and glass. They're quite cold. They're quite, let's say, austere. And we purposely wanted to design a kind of wooden building. This has a wooden structure and laminated wood that was made in Switzerland and then shipped down. And this is in construction now. One of the key features is this. These big screens, so there's these big hangar doors in the facade which open up, 12 meters by 6, and they become LED screens, so that you can have a concert or something going on in the building, and people in the adjacent park or outside can see what's going on. This is the section through the building. The form actually was derived from the actual contour of the site, so the shape is derived by the actual site of the piece of land that the bank bought. And the height the site was actually divided in two. There was a maximum height to this side of the building and this side. So the form was actually grown out of the regulations and the restrictions in terms of the building, the site size. As you can see, there's this ground floor becomes a kind of a auditorium, and there's a kindergarten. And because we don't have a basement for this building, we made a kind of a technical floor so that all the air conditioning and all the machinery is in a special acoustically enclosed space in the middle of the building. But anyway, so you can see this is a recent photograph of the building in construction at the moment, and the roof in titanium has got a mixture of roof lights and solar panels, so it kind of creates this kind of pattern. And believe it or not, this has to be finished in 2 months' time. So it's going to be quite an effort to do this. But very interesting project and a very interesting process in terms of having how to actually make a building like this. We designed this building in Revit. It's the first time we've actually done a BIM project. I don't know whether you guys are studying BIM or whether you're using Revit in terms of kind of programming for design, but it's something that I'm not a computer expert, but to do a building that is complicated as this in terms of the shape, to be able to have a single model, which is a structure, the architecture and the environmental systems in one 3D model is something that is very, very important. Unfortunately, we have a contractor who basically said, well, we don't need any of this, so they start from scratch. But it will become more and more important. And now most of the major furniture companies are now producing Revit blocks, 3D blocks, so that you can use them into developing the interior design of projects. So that's a little bit of a kind of background in terms of some of the history of the studio. And obviously we've done a lot more than this, but it's something that gives you hopefully a little bit of a range related to the kind of the workspace and the offices. And what I wanted to talk about now is just some comments, and maybe people might want to maybe say something, but just some things which I think have been quite influential, and what I think are influential or have been influential might well be influential in the future. If we think about corporate architecture, and particularly the display of corporate power in terms of the office, there have been some quite notable examples, and this, for example, was the headquarters of BMW, where they really wanted to demonstrate not only a kind of an architecture which was symbolic of the brand of the company, but also at that time develop a whole new kind of concept in terms of how the workspace was thought about and developed. And you can see this very kind of open pool of workstations, which today would be totally unacceptable. You know, they thought probably that putting a few plants in the space was a way of kind of humanizing it. The whole, probably the acoustics in here were not very good because there's no soft surfaces apart from the kind of carpet. The lighting is very kind of bland. It's just a very typical kind of strip lighting. But this was, at the time, considered to be the most advanced solution for the workspace. But what continues to kind of come over as this idea of still the power of the corporation. The corporation wanted to demonstrate its financial power and its modernity in terms of thinking. Another project which I think is also interesting to look at and is the John Deere headquarters. This is a company making tractors in North America. And the building had a very, again, this very rational and very kind of, let's say, very dogmatic kind of way of planning, but it attempted to produce this amazing garden inside the building, and you know, there was no glass between the workspace and the garden. So at the time, even though that the actual attitude to kind of work was very kind of rational and very kind of ordered and very, very functional, there was a sensibility of giving the workers, the people, a really beautiful environment, a place to be in. And so I think this is another example of something that's interesting. Another project which I think is totally undervalued in terms of its real reasoning and power and really very beautiful solution in terms of thinking about how to articulate office space is a project by Hermann Hertzberger, Central Bezier, and this idea of how to use the kind of module to create this articulation and to use a similar module that would address different types of activities is something that I think if you were to think about building an office today, you go back to things like this, because it really is a very unique and very interesting way of how to use a modular way of thinking, but in an articulated way, in a very human way as well. And again, this is was built in concrete blocks, and very kind of hard and very rigid and very kind of grey material, but it allowed people to kind of to humanize it in a very particular way, and I think it's a very, very interesting project. This project for Willis Faber, again by Foster and by Michael Hopkins, who I'd worked for before coming to Milan. Again, this was a kind of glass box, rather, you think, well, but it was again a very democratic way of thinking about how to build a building. It was one of the first buildings to really have this kind of plate glass hung facade, which was during the day was kind of black, and then, as you saw before, would be illuminated during the night. And a building that had a swimming pool inside. This was in the 1970s. So again, a very, very revolutionary idea in terms of how to think. This was an insurance company, so they were very forward-thinking in terms of changing the perception of an office space or an office building for a rather traditional and rather kind of autocratic organization. Probably all know this building. Again, this is again this power of kind of corporate sense that I'm going to build the most expensive building because this is what a bank needs to kind of say. This is the Hong Kong Shanghai Bank, again designed by Foster, which at the time was the most expensive building. A very simple, kind of very mechanical kind of floor plate, and as you've probably all seen, produced this idea of these just floors upon floors of kind of office space. And although at the time this was kind of perceived to be, you know, one of the most advanced and most contemporary buildings, I think now nobody would think about doing something like this anymore. Both in terms of the way of spending money, but also in terms of this idea of a machine to be a place of work, I think is something that we've gone a long way away from. Another project, this is SAS, it's a kind of office village, something which I think, had a lot of interest in the time when it was built, but again, it's got lost because we get inundated by all sorts of kind of projects. This was done by Niels Thorpe. It was the idea of creating a kind of street within the building, so that all the office spaces would work onto this shared kind of street space. And this is something which is a theme which has been developed obviously time and time again, but this was one of the first examples where I think the idea of the street and the power of the street was something that worked very, very well. Anybody know where this is? This is your friend Zaha Hadid, and this was, again, a BMW production factory. And I think one of the things that I like about this project, I'm not a great fan of her architecture, but in terms of what she did with the building, was to actually bring together the idea of production and office work in the same space. And this is a very, I think it's a very powerful kind of message for people kind of working there, that you feel that, you know, maybe this guy here is designing, you know, the door handles, but he's involved in a process and is seeing what he's designing or what he's making. He's going through his kind of space. Now this is a very kind of, again, a very Germanic and a very kind of industrial way of expressing this idea. But the idea that the idea of designing and working and production and being mixed together is something which I think has a lot of potential as an idea of thinking about workspace. And it's something that we've kind of done in our project we did in Milan. We've kind of gone a little bit back to this idea of how to put work or production back into the office. Another theme which I think everybody has seen, but again is very important, is how you use old buildings. And it's been very fashionable, let's say, to reuse lofts and to use ex-warehouses. This is one of my favorite examples. This is Wieden & Kennedy. Wieden & Kennedy is in Portland in North America, and this was a refurbishment of that loft building done by Allied Works. Wieden & Kennedy is the advertising agency for Nike, so it's a very important agency, and they have a very powerful way of thinking about how they create brands and how they develop their advertising work. Another thing which I think we always look to the agencies as having the possibility to experiment and to kind of play with the workspace. This is Mothers, and their solution for this office was to produce this continuous table in concrete, which seems totally kind of inflexible and not particularly office-like, but it became the kind of this idea of a central single object which everybody kind of work around. So it did create a sense of kind of family and connection and organizing the philosophy of the company around one singular item. I know I've seen around that you've been working on co-working spaces. This is the hub in London, where there's almost this kind, little bit this idea of the anti-office. It's not kind of designed, it's kind of a little bit kind of informal. You can kind of use bits of cardboard to kind of create your desk or your table. It's got this kind of informality. It's got this idea that somehow you never really know who's going to be working next door to you, who might arrive. But the co-working has become a model. I know there are some important examples here in Barcelona, but I think for many professional people, not everybody, this idea of mobility and the idea of going to a space which you just use in a temporary way has become a very important model or way that as professionals or as we develop our working lives, that co-working will be something that will become more and more important. So, just to finish on this idea of some reflections, we have an amazing contest going on at the moment. This is the dome that was suggested by Buckminster Fuller to cover part of New York, to kind of create this kind of hyper environment, so that underneath this dome you had this kind of idea of perfect climate, you had this protected space that would completely transform the city and would adapt things and would change the whole atmosphere and the whole way that this part of the city could develop. And we have this is Foster with Buckminster Fuller and the minds working together. But we have a very interesting, almost a kind of contest going on at the moment. We have three projects which are in construction or in process at the moment. And this one you all know, which is Apple headquarters, which is a brand, again, wanting to kind of show that almost the building is designed as a product. It's this idea that the building is this kind of sense of perfection. Every single detail, everything is designed like the iPhone or the computer to the minutest detail. The tolerances in this building are incredible. It's a real machine, again, for working, but in this kind of very humane and very green space. And so this is one idea about how certain architects are thinking should be the model of the workplace in the future. And this is the plan here. You see, fascinating. We've been involved, or we know some of the companies who are supplying products to this project, and it's quite unbelievable what they have to go through to actually meet the specification to be able to participate in something like this. The company that did the furniture, the partitions in the project, it's a company called Estelle. They were initially invited from near Vicenza, the company. They had to make a mock-up that was 1,000 square meters of space. There was a mock-up just to be invited to participate. And they'd gone through a kind of process. And they won the project because they came up with a solution of having the doors, sliding doors in the office space that would still work if there was an earthquake. So the building is kind of going like this. The doors will still operate. And this is how they won the project to participate in something like this. So it's interesting to see how the suppliers and how the kind of companies that kind of work on things like this. The next competition is with Facebook. This is Zuckerberg and Frank Gehry, who've designed this amazing building again near San Francisco. And the idea here is that it's a complete kind of chaotic, kind of natural kind of extension of this kind of village. I think it's a very inspiring and it's very interesting to see that these young guys. I mean, okay, Jobs is no longer with us, but Zuckerberg or these young entrepreneurs, that they really want to participate in how we will work in the future. And these are the people that are changing the game. And I think it'd be interesting in the project which will do now with Ricardo, if you could almost try to find a client. If you could find, because when we work on kind of projects, we tend to kind of, we think as, we're designers or you're students, and we can, we're trying to make this thing, beautiful, it's creative, whatever. But if you have a kind of client who has his own kind of agenda, has his own way of thinking, and his own, let's say, inspirations, has a whole different set of processes and experiences, but we have to be able to work with this. This is something that's very, very important in a project. And I think the best projects that we've ever done because we had an amazing client. So I think it'll be interesting in a project like this to maybe have a client. I don't know if it's possible, but it's somebody who can give you something, can give you an awful lot to a project. It can be a nightmare because they will maybe change their minds or they don't agree with you, but it's part of the process. And I think it's very important that even at this stage when you're working, to think that there are, you know, somebody is paying for this, or somebody has asked for this. It's not just a game, it's something that's very, very real. Here you can see this kind of chaotic kind of village, which is it's now been built. And this is the top, so the roof becomes this kind of totally kind of landscaped space. Again, a very, very interesting response to, very Gehry type response to this solution. And then the third project is for these guys, the Google guys, and they've gone to Thomas Heatherwick and to Big to produce their mega concept. And this is obviously very much a kind of Buckminster Fuller idea of creating this huge enclosed space which allows you to kind of create this kind of microclimate, and this idea that working together is no longer about being in a single building or being in a fixed place. It's about creating very much an idea of space. I mean, it's a bit like, you know, the Ramblers here. It's a bit like saying, you know, this is my outdoor, semi-outdoor space. How am I going to use this in the most best way to get people to kind of interact and to help the company, help the organization evolve, and to continue to kind of create the future for all of us. This building, as you can kind of see here, has got this idea of this membrane, which is I think it's based on an idea of umbrellas that kind of open and close, that allows the light to be filtered to kind of come into the space. And this will go ahead. I mean, these guys have the money to do this. I mean, this is the other amazing thing, is that but the budget is not a problem. Just other things which I think are interesting. I think, at least for me, it's always been fascinating to see how personalities have had a really key importance in the design, and how we as architects tend to think about design and how we use design in our processes. Okay, who's this guy? Anyone know? No. This one? That's Joe Nelson, okay. This is Ray and Charles. These guys here, do you know their names? No, it's written on the bottom of it. No, this, Bill Stumpf and Dodd Chadwick, I think, designed this chair, the Aeron chair, which is an unbelievable chair, not just in terms of engineering, but in terms of ergonomics. But it really revolutionized the office chair and the way of thinking about the kind of office chair. And these guys are very, very special. They also designed Ethelspace for for Herman Miller, which was again a very revolutionary office furniture system. So these people have had a huge impact on the whole office industry over the last few years. This is another guy who's had a huge impact on the office. You can look at the name. Okay. This is Frank Duffy. Frank Duffy was the founder of DEGW. DEGW doesn't really exist anymore, but they were the gurus of kind of office thinking and office planning throughout the 90s. They were the people who gave us the brief to design the project that we did with Hayworth, the Tutti Work architecture. And Frank is an amazing character and personality, and somebody, he's an academic on the office, on the workplace, and it's something that you should all read his works, because it's very, very interesting, and it's a very, very, it's a very acute mind in terms of interpreting and what has happened through the evolution of the workplace. This is one of his books, Work and the City, and he was one of the first people to talk about how you could take historical models, spaces that have been used in the past in a particular way, like the club, for example, and how this would come back into the way of thinking of the contemporary workplace. Now this is a very boring, very typical office grid, but the 1 meter 35 grid, which you probably have never had to work with, but it's something that had a huge impact. I mean, most of the office buildings in Germany in the 80s, 90s, and the early, up until quite recently, were all designed using this system, and this was based on the most efficient way of creating. I'll do this. Creating a singular office space. It's called a combi office, which could be then used to double up the modules to create a double working space. But it was something that became fundamental, that all buildings were designed this way, office buildings, for a couple of other reasons. When you double up the modular 1 meter 35 by 1 meter 35, you have 2 meters 70, and you can park a car in that space. So that the buildings were designed so not just for people to work in, but also to park cars. And this was a kind of a way of thinking which was very, very Germanic and very organized, but this was the maximum kind of flexibility that was given to the workspace. The other factor that was very, very influential was that in Germany you couldn't be further away from a window, an opening window, for no more than 6.5 meters or something like this. So that meant that all the buildings were designed with the same kind of width, which was around 30, depending on how you did the cores, but without the central cores, 13.5 meters was the maximum you could do to design a building. So if you go around and study architecture in Northern Europe in this period of time, all the buildings were basically this continuation of these kind of blocks that was a very, very powerful but very sort of industrial way of thinking about the workspace. But it was used everywhere. Another thing which I hope you're all aware of is something called LEED. LEED is a certification system. It came out of the US. It's called the USGBC, which is the United States Green Building Council. And for those that you don't know, this is a system of certification for sustainability and for environmental efficiency. And it's a bit like, you know, TripAdvisor or a Michelin for restaurants. You have the top is platinum, gold, silver, and bronze, and you have a very simple and kind of clear system of quantifying how efficient your building is in terms of the materials it uses, how much water you use, how much energy you use, how far the building materials travel to go from where they're produced to the actual building. And we have something similar in Europe now. It's called BREEAM. Probably in Spain there's something similar, but LEED has become the kind of the international recognized system that everybody wants to kind of have this piece of bronze cast thing you can put on your building and saying that I'm a gold or I'm a silver or I'm a whatever. And now they have something which is very, very interesting, and I think will become more and more important in terms of how we understand buildings. If you LEED now has a kind of a screen which you can put in the foyer of a building, and it tells you how much energy the building is using, how much water the building is using. So it's a bit like, you know, we all want to know how healthy we are, or what our cholesterol level is, or, you know, whether our heart is working. We will have this information now for our buildings, and they've developed a live way of showing this information to people who go to the building, or you can see this, what's going on. So LEED is something interesting. If maybe in the project that you want to do, somebody might be interested to try to test what they've done in terms of the project design through a LEED process. You can go through, it's quite a simple kind of tick the answer kind of selection process, and you can go and see how many points you would get for your project and see how efficient you are. And I say this because when you go into your careers in the future, you will all do different things. And even in interior design, there are specializations, and for example, in the US, you can become you have a master, or you have a qualification to be a LEED certified designer. And this is something that more and more people do because they have an interest in sustainability, but they also they're using their interest to offer a professional service. And these are things to think about in terms of different directions that your careers and your professional lives might take. The thing that we even have to face now is KPI. This is again a very typical American, but now if you talk to a banker who's talking about wanting to design a new office space, they'll say, well, how can I improve my KPI? And this is all about, it's called the power of performance. And unfortunately, people still think, and there's people even thinking even more about how workspace should be designed or thought about in terms of numbers. And it's like, how many square meters do you need per person to make an efficient office space? And this is how many organizations still continue to think today. And there's a whole jargon of words and terminology that people use to express and how to analyze how efficient your workspace and your designing workspace is. And it's a nightmare. One thing which I think is potentially interesting but a little bit more creative, has a science to it, is how we deal with acoustics. And particularly in the project which you will do, acoustics will be a key factor because you're in a huge space. It's got very hard surfaces. So how you make that space work for the people working inside to be acoustically acceptable is something that will be a big challenge for a project. And again, is a part of interior design which is totally underdeveloped. Has a lot of potential, again, to think about how acoustics, which doesn't mean just sticking some acoustic tiles on the ceiling. There's lots of other ways of dealing with acoustics. I remember when we first went to America, they even, to deal with acoustics, they actually put sound into space. It's called white noise, and they call, or sound masking. So to kill the sound of people talking or work going on, they actually put sound into the space to create this sort of this kind of which you don't really hear, but it's there, and it kills the sound within the space. So acoustics has a huge potential, and there's companies like Quadrat who are doing interesting things in terms of how to, well, this is obviously helping them sell their kind of products. This is another product from Quadrat, it's called Soft Cell, and it's basically fabric stretched around an aluminium frame, and behind it is an acoustic panel. And these panels can be either put on the ceiling or applied to different situations. So something that's very, very important. Ergonomics. everybody has different ideas about ergonomics. If you talk to Technogym, who produced this ball here to sit on, they think that they've solved everybody's problems with backs. You just get one of these and you'll be healthy forever. And but then you talk to doctors and people say, no, that's a load of rubbish, etc. So who knows really what is the right solution for ergonomics? But it's something which, again, you'll be asked to think about, and how you respond to ergonomics is something that is becoming more and more important. Health within the workspace is the next big frontier. And really how, if I talked before about performance in terms of measurement of square meters and things like this, and how efficient you use the furniture, has been the mantra of the last decades of office thinking. The next real big areas is health within the workplace, and there's a huge, again, potential in terms of how we think about how we live space, how we think of the climate of space, that will really improve our well-being and help us understand our well-being within the workspace. And we all know that there was all sorts of gadgets. You know, you probably be expected to design the workspace in terms of the project that you'll do now, in terms of the furniture and the colors, the materials and things like this. But it's not just that. More and more, it's actually the design of the workspace will be about the applications and about the software that you use within the workspace. So that's another part of the design process, which will become more and more, it's already important, but it will become more and more important in terms of how you communicate between each other and how you use technology to display information or to take in information. So although I totally, with this, the importance of a physical space and how you think about materials and colors and light and acoustics, the new tools that we will use in terms of communicating between each other and how this will change what we have on our desktops and how we'll communicate between each other and how we relate to each other is something that's very, very important. So, just to go, I hope I'm not boring you. Okay. Has anyone got any questions? No? Okay, before I go into the last part. Are you excited about designing workspace? Yes? Okay. Yes. Okay, you have a question?
Yes, you just mentioned about ergonomics, and it's how you respond to ergonomics. And my question is, how do you respond to ergonomics?
Well, I think one of the questions is, what is ergonomics? So what is ergonomics? That's my question to you. Because ergonomics has been traditionally about very much a kind of measurement science. It's a science of, you know, how tall does the chair have to be? You know, am I sitting comfortably because I'm, you know, this is, I mean, the right posture, I'm able to move, etc. And this is a kind of ergonomics which has a science kind of base to it. Has a lot of studying behind it, but I think there's probably the psychology of ergonomics is also very, very important, because people might look at. I'm sorry. Now, if you were to put this chair next to the Aeron chair designed by Herman Miller, and you would ask which is the more comfortable, and it's not an easy solution, because some people might say, well, I prefer this because it's simpler, I feel much more, it's just kind of, you know, it's a chair, I sit on it. Whereas another person might sit on the Aeron chair, which loves to have the fact that he can change has all the kind of the mechanisms and everything to kind of change. So he has a perception. He wants to kind of like personalize the chair, and really use the idea of it being a machine that can be used by him to adapt to him in a very mechanical and very kind of industrial way. So I think ergonomics is not just purely a science of measurement, but it's also about perception of what we think is comfortable. It's interesting. Christina has pointed out, having been in Barcelona the last few days, that you have a very unique way of dealing with public furniture. The outdoor furniture tends to be put down very casually, whereas we are in the UK, you know, it's got to be, you know, it's in lines. Everything is like, you know, it's in the lines. It's like, you know, but here you see these situations where the chairs have been put down in a very kind of casual way. It's a very natural way about how to create a conversation. So we're not all sitting in a line, kind of like looking out there. We can't talk to the person here. And so, again, for me, this is kind of ergonomics, because it's a relationship between the furniture and the different parts to really to promote interaction with people. So this is a the ergonomics of perception, I think, is something that's very, very important. I don't know if I answered your question.
Well, somehow.
Okay, any other questions? No. Okay. So, just to finish, we okay for time? Yes, I can keep this. Okay, okay. Is the project we did the Passeggiata, and basically, this grew out of the idea, the simple idea that Cosmet, which is the organization which runs the Salone del Mobile, they 2 years ago for the as you may or may not know, the Salone is not just domestic furniture, but it's also, they have kitchens, they have bathrooms, they have office furniture. And depending on which year, it goes in sequences. This last year was the office, and every 2 years, basically, they do office furniture as part of the Cosmet show. And 2 years ago, they asked Jean Nouvel to design this kind of visionary idea of the workspace, and he did the installation. And this year, they asked the studio to develop this kind of concept in terms of the work environment. And we decided to work on this idea of the passeggiata, in the sense that there is no longer this idea of a fixed workplace, but the idea that office work is always moving, that work is no longer a fixed activity. It's something that you're continually moving, and you're continually changing your environment. And so we worked on this theme. It was related to doing research into the past and the Athens. This is a painting by Raffaello, which of the Athens school of Socrates, and the idea that they would, when they taught to the students, they would walk around the gardens, giving lessons, etc. So there's this idea that the mind and the way of thinking was being totally stimulated by being constantly kind of moving. And this is something which I think is, again, is the kind of ergonomics, is something that's very, very important about how we make workspaces spaces to move in, and not just be thinking about, you know, it's a desk, it's a room, it's an office, it's a meeting room, etc., etc. So this is one of the influences. We also looked at throughout history. I've got a couple of these. I can leave these for you to look at, which is a kind of guide to the project. And we also obviously looked at various situations around the world, which is the High Line in New York, where they have completely modified this part of the city by reusing the old raised metro system to become a kind of place of walking. And this has changed not only this idea of health and people appreciating the city, but also changed the whole social fabric of the area around it, and also what is happening in terms of businesses and activities. So how we think the idea of moving through cities and how this will influence our work is something that's very, very important. I mean, you have an amazing examples here. That, the idea, the concept of the Ramblas was about this. Unfortunately, here it's become a kind of bit of a tourist kind of passageway. But the idea of pedestrians moving through the city and being able to interact or being able to stop and work in different types of situations is something that we think will become more and more important in terms of urban planning and architecture and design and workspace design, etc., etc. So we developed this idea of, it's called the kind of infinitive loop, and we were given this space, it was around 1,600 square meters to develop this concept, and it was this very simple idea of producing this continuous walkway, so you can continue kind of walk around the space. We decided that within these 4 areas to develop 4 themes. The club, which is, okay, this idea, it's a kind of lobby, it's a space of meeting informally, contact. It's a bit like a kind of hotel lobby. The idea of free man, which was the idea of individual work in the sense that you were working almost within a cell, within a kind of a personal space. The agora, which is obviously conference room and auditorium. And then the last theme was a laboratory, which is something that I think will become more and more important because the idea of making things as part of what we do in work is becoming more and more accessible. I mean, even here today, I mean, just going around to school, you have the laboratory could be an office space. It could be next door to an office space. It doesn't necessarily need to be seen as being a laboratory and being kind of closed away. So the idea of people not just thinking in terms of producing work on a computer and writing, but actually producing three-dimensionally something as part of their kind of work will become something which I hope will become part of our general or everyday kind of work processes. And so this was the idea of the laboratory. The laboratory is also a way of connecting the whole idea of making with our hands, but also making with machines. So rather than being limited to this idea of technology and making, but it's also the joy of actually physically making something. And this is something that's very, very important. So, this is a kind of sketch of this kind of village, let's say, of kind of spaces. And the top where you kind of came to the height, there's this idea of the Belvedere, which means that you can kind of look over the landscape, which is also important in terms of seeing where you've been while you're walking. And I just go through quickly some of the images. These are the laboratories. Another aspect that was important for us in the project was to work with an artist. We worked with this Marcello, who developed this series of very simple kind of wooden sculptures that were suspended from the pavilion. Structures like this. We had one of the exhibits was actually to have been a ring of lemons, 365 lemons that were suspended, but they all started going moldy, so we had to kind of get rid of them the day before the show opened. But anyway, you can see this idea. It's a very eclectic mix. This is also partly because we went to lots of different companies to ask them to give us pieces to create the environment. So it's a real it is purposely this mixture of people. Here you can see the laboratories. So that for us it was important that there was people making. We had a school from Brianza who were working in wood. We had a company who make a three-dimensional textiles. So the fact that these are things all going on together in the same vicinity, like you have here on the streets here traditionally, is something that's very important. It was also used by politicians because politicians, as you know today, want to be close to their electorate. So to demonstrate that they're all craftsmen and they're able to make things in wood to show that they're close to their people is something that's important. You see here, so this mixture between almost an idea of it's an intellectual work and physically making something is something that's I think very, very important, and this should be part of a process. So this idea that the idea of work and the workplace is not a static thing. It's something that's always happening, moving forward. This is the Agora space. We used we're using standard products to. This is acoustic tiles to create this kind of enclosure around the space. We did as part of the research, we did investigation of how the workplace was presented in film and cinema, and it's a very interesting process to go back over the last 40 years and see how the workplace has been portrayed in film. The classic things from Jacques Tati and his whole way of looking at the modernization of workspace, to films like Wall Street, where there's this whole idea of the power of the economics and the power of the guy with the braces making money and his very big and expansive kind of office. So maybe I can send you this film that was made with the workspace through film, which is something that's very interesting. Anyway, so I'll say thank you.
Thank you for your speech. Very interesting. But I only didn't understand 2 words.
Only 2?
Only 2 words of one title.
Well, muchas gracias.
No, muchas gracias. Yes. No, when you just present the BMW office.
Pardon, sorry?
When you present the BWM office.
Yes. Okay.
It was ships and influence.
Yes.
What means ships?
Shifts.
Shifts. What
shifts.
Shifts?
Okay. Shifts means changes.
Changes.
Okay. So shift is to move something from one place to one place. Okay.
And KPI. What means?
Key Performance Indicator.
What?
Key Performance Indicator.
Key performance.
No, basically.
Indicator.
Okay.
No.
Okay. KPI.
There are 2 little things, but.
No. It's again. It's quite. It's interesting because if we have a project now for a bank, and the people within the bank who are responsible for the project, who have to demonstrate to their boss that the project which they're doing is totally working and is successful and is efficient, need to have the numbers to show that this KPI is okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
about La Passeggiata, definitively the question is that the spaces between are the more important spaces in the office. It's not the places when we are working in a sense of be stopped, but these places between where we meet others are the best, are the more important spaces in the office?
I think that I mean, yes, in the sense that it's not just about designing a meeting space or an office or the foyer, but how you go from that place, from one place to another, is part of the importance of the process, because it's the possibility to meet somebody by chance. It's the possibility to understand the organization, because I mean, traditionally, if you go to a big organization, you walk down the corridor and they have paintings and sculptures, and that's a way of demonstrating their intellectual, their cultural kind of thinking or importance, or how they would like to spend the money. But obviously, things have changed and moved on from that. So the in-between spaces become very, very important. So the circulation space is something that needs to be thought of, not just in terms of being a corridor, but as being part of the perception and being part of the activity. Because in some ways, we're always receiving information. Now, even when you're in a corridor, you're getting emails or you're getting information. So it's no longer this idea that work is, you know, I'm only working when I'm sitting at my desk or in a meeting. You're working all the time.
So we can define the workplace as a place where, above all, we meet others? Is a place,
yes, I think,
to meet?
Yes.
Is that?
I mean, one thing, in terms of going back to KPI, what is happening now is that companies will want to have less space. They know if an organization is, I don't know, 2,000 people, they know that they don't need 2,000 desks, okay? Because there's never going to be 2,000 people in that building at the same time wanting to sit down at a desk. So the philosophy is to say, okay, let's design a building where there's maybe 1,000 desks, because we know that maybe is necessary, but design other types of spaces that will allow people to kind of interact, but also create a culture where people will no longer always go to the office. Now most big international organizations say, if you want to stay at home 2 days a month or a day a week, you can do this. It's part of the flexibility of kind of working. Now, whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, it's the idea of giving people the flexibility to how to organize their lives and the way that they integrate work into their lives. So the in-between spaces and becoming more and more important.
Any question?
I was wondering one thing. Are you applying this concept to any real project in the office? Or?
We're working on a project now where this is going on. This is happening. Yes.
So we'll see this. Like,
yes, in the future. Yes. No. So, I mean, it's not exactly this, but I mean, we want to take this project forward. We will do this as a research anyway, because it's interesting for us, and I would like to maybe make this into a building, or to make it into an urban kind of situation. So we develop this as a kind of part of the ongoing research. Okay. So we will do this anyway. So even the installation that we did for the furniture fair probably will be remounted in the city. So it will be reinstalled in another building or another situation, because people want to use this as a way of to debate about the workplace. But also, one of the reasons for doing this is to try to engage with the companies who are making chairs or making office furniture, to give them an idea, to stimulate them to think about new things to produce for the future. And this is very, very important. So the industry, not only the industry has to keep moving as well.
Well, Nick, thank you very much. From my point of view, this has been a masterclass, really a masterclass, with a review of the history of the workplace, with emotion in the emotional image, and a great conclusion. Thank you very much. I delighted this lecture. I hope that the students also, the student too. See you soon.
Okay. Well, I look forward to coming to see how your projects turn out.
Thank you.
Okay.